Thanks a lot, Eyal, for taking the time. I used the time to introduce you and your contribution to the show Under the Radar.
Great.
The added contribution that we're happy to receive, which is nice because our visitors now have something new to see that have seen the show before. So that's really cool. Thanks a lot, right, to you and your team. Now, today, as you know, we've been doing this series for quite some time now. We've spoken to different people with different backgrounds, and of course, for today, what I'm really interested in is to understand how do you look from the forensic perspective to this phenomenon of corona that is so strangely universal in our world, because practically everybody is concerned with it. Everybody talks about it, no matter what the different contexts are in which you operate or live and work. Somehow it affects everybody, and it sparks interpretations about its significance. Is it just a temporary crisis? Is it something that will affect us for longer? If so, how? So in your work, you deal always with phenomena that are not really obvious, that are kind of hidden, or whose consequences are kind of blurry. And you've made your work basically about the investigation of these kind of hidden phenomena. So I'm sure that it struck a particular chord when you were confronted with this phenomenon. So what did you think about when you first came to basically came to terms with the reality of this pandemic, the lockdown, this kind of emergency condition on a global scale?
So first of all, I'm really happy to be in this conversation and remotely to support the exhibition that you've curated. So thank you. I think that when Corona struck, we, imagine we were so deep in so many investigations, working on issues in the Greek border, kind of really violent sort of response of the Greek military and security forces to the opening of the border on the Turkish side. We were working on migration through the Mediterranean, obviously, and in the Aegean. We were working on issues in Palestine. We were working on surveillance. We were working on, on my own visa denial to enter the US at the time. And it almost it was something like in the corner of our mind, and we didn't know, is it just like a disturbance? Go away. We need to work. We need to actually look at the situation in all those places until we gradually, and I wouldn't say we're the first to understand, but we have understood how governments effectively mobilize one crisis to aggravate another. How governments are using the way that the eyes are being pulled in one direction, that the sense of insecurity is increasing politically. And it is very often when people feel insecure that they accept government repression, they accept government surveillance, that they accept the closing, the curtailing of rights, the closing of borders. So all of a sudden, we are seeing that, in fact, it is not something that takes us away from investigating what we need to do, but effectively becomes the prism through which we need to look at migration, we need to look at surveillance, we need to look at the occupation of Palestine, and we need to look at issues of cyber weapons and targeting. And we could see how all those issues were effectively aggravated,
connected
by the
So you would see Corona as kind of it's like an amplifier of existing issues that make them, that make it even more urgent and even more pressing.
The kind of hope that we have, the people in the social movement and civil society, actors have, is that there is some kind of balance that we can reestablish. We can reestablish, we can break the state monopoly over information, we can expose things, we can get the public on our side. This is something that is really important. You know, we're not like technicians for court. We're not just giving evidence to court, although sometimes we do. We want to inform the public. We want to make people think in different way about structural racism, about supremacy, about migration, etc., and the way we're dealing with that. And so there is a kind of an equation that you're building by which you say, let us show you kind of how serious human rights violations are, and we can get some redress. But when a new crisis emerges, it shifts this economy, or this equation is completely shifted, Andreas, and people are willing to accept much stronger repression. Effectively, they say, if the borders are closed, if I'm not allowed to leave out of my house, I would accept people drowning in the Mediterranean. I would accept people being shot on the border, on a river, on the Evros River between Greece and Turkey.
Which is the site
and the massive aggravation of settler colonial practices in Palestine, surveillance, destruction of houses, all annexation. Now Israel is, using that sort of like diversion of attention to grab a big part of the West Bank, etc. And most concerning, and something we're working about now, putting a lot of our attention to, and this is maybe a little bit because all of a sudden we turn into a virtual office ourselves. No, so if anyone, I don't know if the audience here, anyone is a member of forensic architecture or been in our office, it's a kind of like what we pride ourselves. It's a wonderful kind of like open studio, a kind of like newsroom meet artist studio. This is kind of like how it looks. It's very much collective work. We're all assembling, we are speaking about issues, we're theorizing them, we're looking at the consequences, etc. And all of a sudden, like, boom, we're scattered in like 10 countries, or, I don't exactly know the number. We are communicating with each other remotely. We are exposed to surveillance like we've never been before. And we understand that surveillance is now increasing, and that the kind of violence that we will have to deal with, that forensic architecture will have to deal with in the future, is a kind of a combination of physical and digital violence. And that all issues of structural racism, of white supremacy, of sort of violence towards colonized people, racialized people, is moving into the digital domain. And that this kind of violence, this kind of combination of digital, physical violence, is something we need to gear up, because we need to develop new tools to deal with it. Now, we're not hackers, we're not computer specialists, but we understand that when you're hacked, when you're targeted with cyber weapons, stuff starts happening to you. Our life is so entangled, our physical life is so entangled with our digital, carry-on instruments, that effectively codes, a series of zeros and ones that are sent to your phone or to your computer, would give you a heart attack, would inform people that are after you, and physical stuff will start happening to you very fast after you're digitally tracked.
I mean, you're speaking about the violence of surveillance, and at the same time, we've seen that there is an ambiguity about information and information technologies in this crisis when it comes to contain the crisis. In some countries like Taiwan or South Korea and others, Singapore, have been very transparent, let's say, in their use of personal information with the interest of containing the virus. Is there a way how we can do digital tracing that doesn't turn into an Orwellian condition, or would you make an exception? you know, with regard to the possibility of using personal data in the end, if it's for the interest of actually helping people not to die? Or do you think surveillance is basically always bad? And if you allow it once to be used in this kind of, let's say, transparent in bracketed terms way, then you open the Pandora's box and you pave the way for a dictatorial regime at a global scale.
Look, it's a complicated equation. You know that it's also true that there are necessities, and it's also true that technology could potentially improve our capacity to know and learn about the world and take informed decisions. The problem is not tracing, the problem is not technology here, the problem is who has access to it. And I believe that the best way to control any problem in the world is inform the public, share data, and allow people to make the decision themselves rather than centralize it in some government archive, as if those people are having your good in mind. And maybe they have your good in mind, maybe even they have my good in mind, but there are always people that are excluded from it, and these are our friends. These are the people we work with. These are our stakeholders. It's always going to be used against the most vulnerable people in society, or people who are at the margin, at the threshold of society, migrants, etc. I fear that if every person that moves in the street needs to be tracked, immediately there will be people that are moving like you are the sans-papiers, no? Those people without papers. Now there are people without GPS coordinate, no? And immediately we need to always look at every policy, not at how it affects, you know, privileged, middle class people, but how it may affect the most vulnerable people in society, and make the determination according to the most vulnerable, not according to the mainstream. That is an absolutely important principle that you need to bear in mind. So in as much as it puts at risk those, you know, migrants or other people, if it puts at risk, if corona tracing equipment is putting at risk Palestinian under settler colonial domination, we need to start from that point and ban it. And indeed, I tell you, in relation to Israel, you know that I'm born in Israel, and a lot of the work that I do on Palestine, anti-colonial work in relation to Palestine, indeed, it was Palestinian political and civil rights groups, both in Palestine and in Israel, or, you know, in this space, undefined space of Palestine and Israel, that managed to stop corona tracing being performed by the security services in a Supreme Court case. To a certain extent, our fate and our future is depending on political organization of people who have been marginalized, who have been excluded, who are being dominated, and it's their political organization and their claim that we need to support. And in fact, in as much as the need to be technological kind of data that support the claim by Palestinians against surveillance, that would benefit also, Jewish Israelis in a sense. I think that they are the democratic element in society. Those migrants, those so-called sans-papiers, or now sans-GPS, are the people that are the democratic elements in Europe, in our society. We need to start from there in order to look at any transformation and to design any transformation. And we need to think about their vulnerability rather than the health and safety of the mainstream.
There's something interesting in the discourse of the media about this. It's basically being reported about Western countries, affluent countries, how they deal with this crisis. It's countries that have a healthcare system that works. It's countries with urban conditions where people can more or less well distance each other, can stay at home, and so on. We know less about countries that, have I'm thinking of countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, African countries that have a more precarious healthcare system, that have cities with insane densities and populations that we can't even imagine what it means to live, which basically have no place to distance each other from themselves. So how is it that we don't talk about about what this crisis means there? Because it will strike at a maybe much larger level than it has hit us. How do you follow this?
No, and I understand your concern, though. To what at least I've been following in the countries, in the places where we worked, and with people that we worked in Cameroon, in Mali, in Sudan, etc. I don't see those levels of infections that are in Europe or in the global north yet. And indeed, I think that there is a sort of what it illustrates to me is a kind of the total codependency we have, and that as humanity, and the very idea that healthcare, national healthcare can never fully deal with a crisis of this scale. And we know that national healthcare services is kind of, sort of a leftover. Perhaps the sort of, the NHS here in Britain is a kind of a gift of the sort of post-war era, the kind of, a result perhaps of centralized medical services that were in the war now were applied to social care. But effectively isolating them, creating a decision-making process that is taken on a national level, and then forcing you to harden the border around the nation and perhaps allow some movement within the nation, is a kind of a ridiculous approach where effectively vulnerabilities are based on codependencies. And if there is anything that we need to take from it, is infrastructure of healthcare must be universal, and the equality of dealing with healthcare situation everywhere in the world, if it's unequal, it's going to affect people everywhere. I think so many things recently illustrate to us that inequality is not just like morally wrong, is technically wrong, is creating problems that are that would affect everybody, would affect economical inequalities, healthcare inequalities, etc. Are problems that could be dealt with, and I think that we can imagine that the scale of this healthcare crisis is such that we can imagine building, I don't know if it's on the basis of the World Health Organization or there need to be something completely different, that create physical infrastructure of healthcare as universal right for healthcare, which would be argued, and effectively you would be able to convince wealthier nation to foot the bill precisely because of those interdependencies that we are seeing.
But at the same time, it's not just a question of rich countries versus poor countries. We realize that a couple of rich countries, such as the UK, the United States of America, Brazil, have incredible infection numbers, and that seems to be based not on...
That's what I was saying, yeah. I mean,
it's
relatively poor countries were doing well, much better in that case, yeah. But the interdependency is still there.
Yeah. No, I was wondering why. I mean, this is an interesting connection, isn't it? That authoritarian political figures that try to deny the reality of this crisis have pushed their countries in healthcare crises of an unprecedented magnitude. I think more people have died of COVID-19 in the US than have died in the Vietnam War, meanwhile. And Do you think Corona could have an effect on the political situations in those countries that we mentioned in a longer term, that where this crisis basically shakes up the political, let's say, fortune of these countries, which, especially if we look at to the United States and the approaching election, could have a very important consequence for the whole world.
Yeah, I heard that. Who's up for election? Yeah, I can see the point, but the American election and also Trump himself is not exactly the. I think the problem are much deeper than that. I think though that if to speak about it from the terms that I could add from the kind of the logic of our own work over the years, what we were seeing is that an incredibly effective and efficient machine of doubt being put in place.
And denial.
Doubts around negation, denial of anything from climate change to human rights violation, to genocide, to colonialism, to all things that could be denied were there, and techniques that were rather ingenious in doing so, of kind of like how to spread doubt, how to use the internet in order, and how to manipulate kind of synthetic actors, trolls and bots online to effectively target centers of truth claim dissemination and create doubts within them. There's a whole kind of algorithmic kind of work. If you move into Twitter and you plot it, you see it kind of looks like Star Wars, right? With kind of galaxies of associations and people trying to cut through them and mobilizing multiple.
Okay, we're stuck here.
Am I still there? Hello?
Yeah, you're still there. You've came back.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just don't see my image, which is fine. But do you see it?
Yeah, I can hear you. Your image is frozen, but your voice is not. So
okay.
The voice is good.
So, and I think that has become incredibly efficient and now starting to kind of destroy the basis on which societies stand. That is the capacity to independently verify facts. If we say that our political systems are, our social societies are based on particular shared language, sometimes multiplicity of cultures, of values, etc. But there is a kind of a shared commons of a sort of like that we could agree upon, a perception of the world. We are on the planet is getting warmer, there's there's human rights violation happening on it. There seem to the machine of destroying those ability to disseminate and explain and test facts have been destroyed, and that was all good and fine as long as the facts were things of value. But when the facts are failed in the field of medicine, it's not going to help you to drink bleach to cure yourself from COVID or to protect yourself from COVID. So effectively, that kind of auto-destructive machine has kind of arrived at its limit. And in a sense, we're seeing a kind of a combination of an epistemological crisis with a health crisis. And that's what kind of aggravates it in different places, I think. But, again, I mean, COVID is like, it's, I think this is pretty much the extent of what I could say about it. It's not always at the center of, I mean, it's not the only center of our focus and thinking right now.
No, but I think where's the connection? Where I see the connection between the Corona crisis and the denial of its reality and your work is that your work is driven by an almost militant ethics of truth and this incredible commitment to establish truth based on a forensic excavation method of facts. And all your work shows this really interesting sort of matter-of-factness in the way that you establish a reality. And it's what I was always asking is, do you see yourself as, I mean, do you think that this industrial production of lies and denial that we see at stake in social media, in the communication of certain governments, is something that we can overcome with by this type of methodological insistence on truth and the necessity to stick to this concept, to fight this type of blurrification of facts? Or do you see we're basically done for because this complex of lie production basically is so overpowering and it's using so many resources and so many media that the type of activity that you're doing is almost like a heroic act of remembrance of what it was to rely on a concept of truth while we're actually basically embedded in a web of multiplied facts that become lies in the end.
No,
So,
I think we'd be giving too much ground if we say that the dark epistemologists, this is how I call the sort of the post-truth ones, those people, the dark epistemology is a way of breaking apart, not just simply saying a lie, but trying to break the networks of knowledge production that are important for the establishment of facts, right? Mm-hmm. Firstly, I think we're in the middle of a battle. The fact that the other side has pulled some punches does not mean we need to abandon the game by any means. Otherwise, no, of course whenever you'd have an enemy with some capacity, you would just say, "Oh, that fight is lost." It's not lost, and it's definitely, to a certain extent, there's something stubborn about facts that kind of keep on returning and haunting, and I think that there is a way to do that. I don't think that the way to do it, though, is what we hear very often in the mainstream, that right now we need to buttress the institutions of power knowledge, those pillars of power knowledge on which our societies are built, the court, the FBI. I hear now the FBI would save us from lies. The court system, the university, the police, etc. I think that to a certain extent, what I share with dark epistemologists is deep mistrust in those institutions of what Foucault called power knowledge, right? That sort of way of dominating through organizing and centralizing the capacity to archive and process information. Our technique is very different. So whereas official truth are relying on the reputation of these organizations, of the Mueller, the Mueller report, or other, Princeton University or something like that, we say we need to find a way that we call open verification, which is a collaborative way, an open way, in which activists, together with the people suffering state repression firsthand, together with maybe architects and scientists, perhaps in collaboration with a fluid dynamic expert and a curator like you, and other practitioners, extremely heterogeneous groups of different skills from different places, contributing openly for the establishment of facts. So that we take the challenge of dark epistemology and we do not fight a losing battle, a kind of attrition war, a war of attrition, by saying, okay, now we need to be a bit more conservative, prop up the New York Times, the Washington Post, the court system, and Princeton or whatever, Columbia, and these will establish the truth. But we say, no, we take that challenge and we establish much more radical, much more democratic, and much more open way of truth production. And in order to insist on them, when you work with wide networks of some professional, some less professional, when you mix different forms of knowledge, you need to do what we do in our video, and that is to explain exactly what you do in this kind of matter of fact. And there's something magic that happens in this sort of matter of fact type description. This is obvious, and number 2 is obvious, number 3 is obvious, number 5, 4, 6. By the time you get to 14, whoa, it starts becoming weird, because we kind of guide you very, very slowly through the way we do things. So when an expert would say how they do, sometimes they just say, well, you have to rely on my reputation and my word that this is the truth. We never do that. We never want to become expert like that. We will always explain to you and to the public and to our stakeholders, to communities we work for, how we arrived at what we do, because of 2 things. 1, we have to be believed. 2, we use each one of our videos is like a manual. It's like a tutorial. It's like a how-to. And our hope is to, with every investigation that we do, to do 2 things. 1 is to show the fact of the matter, and 2 is to open up slightly the possibility of truth production, open up the question of who can speak truth to power, whose voices could be heard, what kind of techniques and technologies we could use, how to tell young architects and artists that what they have in their laptop is powerful enough to hold government to account, if you just combine it right and work and establish the coalitions in a correct way.
Okay.
I have a birthday of a little girl who's my daughter, Hannah. So I'd have to leave soon.
Yeah. Just to the end, I was just curious, have you seen your show in the US that you couldn't attend the opening to?
Wieso? I'm not allowed to go.
Okay, so that hasn't changed. Has the
No.
show been opened actually to the audience?
It's open and closed after a week.
We've
experienced incredible amount of censorship after my visa denial on behalf of the institution, but you'll all hear about it very soon.
Okay, then we're curious. Thanks for taking time on the day of
Andreas,
your daughter's
pleasure.
birthday.